Hello, friends. Welcome to the Logistics of Logistics podcast. My name is Joe Lynch. Thank you so much for joining us today. On the Logistics of Logistics, I talk to experts in logistics and transportation, warehousing, fulfillment, supply chain, and of course, technology. And during these interviews, I'm always the one asking the dumb questions. I ask the dumb questions so you don't have to. Today's topic is recruiting and retaining top performers in logistics with my friend Charlie Saffro. Charlie is the founder and CEO of CS Recruiting, a talent and recruiting firm that specializes in the logistics, transportation, and supply chain verticals. In addition to running one of the top recruiting businesses in the logistics and supply chain space, Charlie is also a frequent conference speaker, a great LinkedIn follow, and she recently gave a TED Talk. So please take a listen to my conversation with Charlie Saffro. How's it going, Charlie?
It is going well. I'm just happy to be here today. I always love our conversations.
I do too. So Charlie, please introduce yourself and your company and where you're calling from today.
Sure thing. I am Charlie Saffro. I am the CEO and founder of CS Recruiting. We are a third-party recruiting firm that specializes in logistics, supply chain, and transportation. We are mostly in Chicago. We're a remote organization, and we are working with clients that are hiring companies, candidates that are job seekers all over the country, working to fill positions of all levels and all functions within the greater supply chain industry.
So Charlie, I know you guys work with carriers, brokers. Are you mostly on the logistics provider side, or are you also working with the supply chain companies that are looking for logistics people?
We do it all. And really, the way our business evolved, being in Chicago, obviously, there's a big 3PL and brokerage market here. So, yeah, that's where I started with a lot of connections in my backyard. And then over the years, we very organically evolved to working with carriers, working with warehousing companies, managed transportation providers. And then we started to dip into the shipper side. So, we do work with manufacturers, distributors. And then, of course, along comes the partnerships, the technology, the equipment offerings, the various services. So we think of this common denominator as anything having to do with logistics, supply chain, transportation, decision making is usually a position in our wheelhouse. We do focus on direct hire, really the professional positions. We're not doing any temporary or staffing, but focusing on entry level all the way up through the C-suite.
Yeah, and it's interesting because we'll get to this a little more in a minute. We're in a buyer's cycle where right now, if you're an employer, you can say, I've got my choice of who to pick. And yet people are still coming to companies like yours because you can go to Indeed and you can go to LinkedIn and these, but it doesn't always work. And I think we'll talk more about culture in a minute. We'll talk a little bit about fit in a minute. And there's a reason people pay outside recruiting services because it's necessary.
Focus on what you are good at, focus on what you do. It's the same reason we outsource anything. Recruiting talent is a full-time job. And even during market lulls, if you're not hiring at that volume, there is plenty to do to really prepare for the future of recruiting and hiring. And obviously, the retention piece goes hand in hand with that.
Yep. Charlie, before we hit the record button, we were talking too long because now we have a hard stop in 40 minutes. But you just did a TED Talk. Tell us a little bit about your TED Talk.
Yeah, I did a TEDx back in April. It was an incredibly challenging process. I don't think I knew what I was signing up for when I applied, but very grateful that I was selected and I had a chance to share my message. And really, my message goes hand in hand with what our company is about, what our culture is about. I talked a lot about company culture, this idea of it being designed or being created by default. Talk a lot about employee engagement. And at the end of the day, the big message is we are trained, or our generation, Joe, was trained to believe the customer is always right. And one, that's not always true. But my philosophy after years of observing this market and running my own business is focus on your employees. And if you really treat your employees right and you empower them and you hire the right people with the right values, they will take care of the customer. It doesn't matter if the customer's right or wrong, but it's empowering those employees to represent your company. And that was really what my TED Talk was about, is pulling in examples of companies and brands we all know and love that do it well, but then also my personal experience and so many hiring companies, so many job seekers, and then of course building my own team over the years. I will be the first one to admit when I make a mistake and learn a lesson. And so just being able to share what my journey looked like and the importance of culture in our workforce.
Yep. And by the way, the name of that is of your TEDx talk was Business is Personal dash Prioritizing People Pays Off. And I know you do that with your company. And I saw you post, you're very active on LinkedIn. And last year at this time, I saw you at TMSA in Savannah. We shared a lift back to the airport. Thanks so much for dragging me over there. And I asked you while we're there, how do you post so much? Because the way I figured out, or the way I learned that you did a TEDx talk, is you were posting about your preparation a few months ago, a month ago. And I was like, where this world gal gets all her time, you must have 12 or 13 days in your week.
No, it's funny. I was asked this question recently alongside someone else who is very active on LinkedIn, and this other person is a marketer, and we had very different answers. Both approaches work, but she said she outsources everything to a ghostwriter and a team that is posting and engaging. And it's my voice because I interview and I tell them the topic I want them to talk about. So it's really easy for me. Like, I just spend an hour a month with my ghostwriter and then everything happens after that. And I was like, okay, my process is very different. It is a full-time job. I wake up every morning. I think about what I want to share based on what I'm inspired by, what's going on in the market, a lesson that I can share with the learning. I think it's actually, I've almost developed like these behaviors that this is just part of my Monday through Friday. So the same way we wake up and brush our teeth every morning, like I am constantly looking for inspiration, screenshotting stuff, jotting down notes. And it's almost become like a lifestyle, but I wouldn't say it's a burden. I enjoy it. And then I think the big reason is it drives business. Can I prove the ROI, and can I say that I'm here today because you saw one of my posts? Maybe not, but in the end, it's that brand, it's that recognition, it's that exposure. And to me, that is our number one business development and marketing strategy in the last 14 years, just putting ourselves out there.
I will say, when you were posting about preparing for TEDx, you put your calendar up there. And I was like, oh, first off, very well organized. But also, I see you've got family stuff in there. And you were sharing everything about this process, including your doubts and vulnerability. And sometimes that's overblown online where you're like, oh my God, stop it already. Wasn't like that. It felt like the appropriate level of, okay, I'm sharing my ups, my downs. I think the advantage of that is people go, oh, I get to know and trust you in some way, where somebody who's comes out and says, I'm perfect. I do everything right every day. My life is perfectly in balance. I don't go crazy and eat cookies at a party. I don't drink too much. I don't do anything wrong. That comes off as, oh, that's not at all relatable. It's not very human. You come off very human on that. And as far as coming on the podcast, of course, I always love having you on my podcast, but all podcasters want to talk to someone who just did a TEDx talk, because if you did a TEDx talk, you're going to be a great guest.
Yep. Yeah, and I think that is first of all, the business I'm in is recruiting. Like, we are dealing with humans, and especially with all this up and coming AI, that is something that I feel very strongly about. Is we may outsource stuff, we may automate stuff, but at the end of the day, there is such an emotional variable in recruiting, and we are doing really important work when you think of this idea of putting people in jobs, bringing talent to a company that may change the whole future trajectory. And so it has to be human. You have to see the flaws as much as you see the wins. And what was so hard for me about that is I was sharing my vulnerability before I actually knew the outcome. And that was hard, that I'm putting myself out there and saying, this is really hard to write. It's really hard to memorize. And maybe in 6 weeks when my TED Talk was out there, it would have been a total bomb, but I still felt like it was worth putting it out there. And I'm very happy with how it turned out. But I made that decision very intentionally that no matter how it goes, this is what I'm feeling right now. And my network will resonate with that. And if anyone's ever thinking of doing a TED talk, like, here you go. This is what you're signing up for. So and I want my team to know what I'm working on. I want my clients to know. So you got to show some cards, not everything, but there is a component to that personal brand.
And I always think you're definitely a leader, you have a great company. You're you're s- you're the good example. So when you're out there doing the right things and saying, "Yeah, I might be the founder and the CEO of this company, but I am not flawless, nor do I expect you to be flawless. I do want to see the effort, though. I do want to see the right things." And I think we do that for our kids too. I want my kids to see me stumble. Of course, I don't want them seeing me stumble as much as I do, but I want them to see me stumble.
Exactly. Isn't it? I feel like my kids learn so much about my profession and the way I work when I started working from home during 2020 when they're homeschooling. But I think in their mind, like I went to this big office, I was in charge of everyone all day, and I came home feeling like the boss when I'm actually pulling my hair out and I'm pacing and I'm stressed and sweating. And they had to see that to really respect why I work as a mom and what I'm doing all day.
Yep. So I want to talk. Today's topic again is recruiting and retaining top performers in logistics with my friend Charlie Saffro. Before we hit record, we identified one, two, three, four, five areas I want to talk about. The first is just the market overall. I know we all know right now it is tough for someone looking for jobs. I am always asking Charlie, would you talk to my friend? He needs a new job. Would you talk to this gal? She needs a new job. There's a lot more of those going on right now than my friend is looking for help hiring. That is the nature of the market. Please elaborate.
It is very much an employer market right now, which means there are way more job seekers than there are jobs. And these job seekers may be active where they are unemployed or they have made up their mind that they are going to make a move, or they're passive where they're just always open to hearing what's out there and their value. But employers are in a position right now where they can be picky. I think the message I have to a lot of job seekers right now is there is so much going on behind the scenes that has nothing to do with you. So if you don't hear back after an interview, you get ghosted, you get lowballed, it may not be a reflection of you or even the conversation or your resume. It's the decisions these companies are making. It's this idea that there's a lot of fear in the market right now, which there is, especially at that leadership level. And a lot of companies, they're undecided. Are we on a hiring freeze or should we hire for the future? So there's a lot going on, but it does give employers that position where we are seeing more lowball offers, unfortunately. We are seeing more interviews before an offer because these employers want to see everyone out there to make sure they're making the best decision. I talked to a candidate the other day and they said, I found my dream job on LinkedIn and it had 1,000 applications already. So what am I supposed? Should I apply and be 3001? I'm applying after it's been posted for a week. Like, how are they ever going to find me? And that's the reality of the market is it's a very saturated pool of talent. So you have to stand out.
Yeah, and I don't have nearly the expertise that you do, but I've been around. And one of the things I've been telling to job seekers is don't be discouraged, just keep going. But also, it has gotten easier than ever before to submit a resume. And so you can submit a resume every 15 seconds, it seems. And that's why there's 3,000 applicants. And that person who says, I'm perfect for that, the other 2,500 of those aren't even close. They just said it's easy to submit my resume, so I did. And that still means you're competing with 500 people. But I think also, we talked about this before we hit record, was this idea of you'll find your people. And when you're young, you tend to think every time you're failing, not working or not finding just the right job, is that I'm a misfit. I'm not that good I'm not ever going to be successful. And I think you have to say, I'm going to find my people one of these days. Where I came from was not the right fit. And it's not necessarily me. As you get older, when you get like my age, when you doesn't work out, you're like, those guys are losers. Right? Those guys are the misfits, not me. But when you're young, you tend to take it very personally. Oh my God, I went to college and now I will forever live in my mom and dad's basement.
And that's part of the journey. I think back, a story that I've shared on LinkedIn and different speaking opportunities is that I once accepted a job and I did not do my diligence during the interview process. And I walked in, it was nothing like I expected. It was also nothing like they had told me, but I quit on the end of my second day. And I go back to that, and it was the most mortifying, embarrassing moment of my life. I'm like, I can't believe, does this look like I'm giving up? If I didn't quit, I wouldn't have this business today. And hindsight is 2020, but I can reflect back and be like, that moment was probably the toughest moment of my career at that time. But look at where it took me. I had to make that decision and have a couple tough weeks of looking for a new job. So it's all part of the journey.
It is such a disheartening time when you're looking for a job. So I always say to this, I went through it in the Great Recession. I lost my job and I had a very good job, and I was unemployed and underemployed for, I don't know, 18 months, 2 years. It was brutal. I lost taking money out of my savings. And after a while, you just start thinking, like, am I going to deliver pizzas? I had a professional career. I have a master's degree. I have 25 years of experience. I've done all these things, but maybe I've zigged when I should have zagged. And it was just the beginning of something better for me. I had left automotive and I thought I'll go back to automotive when it recovers. And I never went back because logistics and transportation and warehousing was a better fit for me. And then podcasting, I would have never, if you would have told me 10 years ago I'd be a podcaster, I was like, I didn't know what a podcast was. So no one wants to go through these setbacks, but when you're going through them, just realize this is where the magic is. If you make it, if you do the work.
Yeah, exactly. You got to do the work and you got to have hope and be your own advocate. No one else is going to do it for you.
So there's lots of job seekers. What advice do you give them right now while they're struggling?
Yeah, there's so many different steps of the process that I could give advice with, but I would say in terms of looking for a job, certainly don't give up on applying. That is going to help you understand what the market is demanding, what types of opportunities are out there. Job descriptions are also a great way to figure out how you sell yourself. You look at a job description and say, okay, it needs these 5 skills. I have 4 of them. That's what I want to highlight when I apply or while I'm interviewing or networking. I always think that there is this human aspect. So I don't think it's all about who you know, but I think there's a component. And my suggestion is don't just apply, but apply and build a relationship, get a connection, send a note. It doesn't hurt.
I said this to a friend of mine who's looking for a job. I said, go to LinkedIn groups. I said, keep applying. Go ahead, keep applying. It's really easy to apply for jobs, but go on LinkedIn groups. He has a particular ethnic group that he's part of. And I said, it's first generation in the country. And I said, so go to that group. There's 300 of them. Go to those groups. They are going to recognize you as one of their own, and send them a note saying, hey, I'm looking for a new gig. I'm looking for advice. I said, a lot of people, especially as they get older, especially if they have kids, like my kids had their entry level jobs. I know how hard it is. And I get a lot of parents will reach out to me and say, hey, would you talk to my kid? They're looking for an entry level job. And I was like, a lot of people will give you advice, and you need that advice. As much as it's painful to ask, better to do that than just say, I applied for 4,000 jobs this week. How many conversations did you have?
And what can you learn from that? Did you not get called back because of the talent pool? Did you not get called back because your resume didn't stand out? Did you not get called back because someone looked at your resume and perceived you to be lazy because you were out of work for 2 years? There's so many variables, but my advice to job seekers is don't give up, and to also just know the reality. Everyone deserves to be in a role with a company that their values align with your values. You feel a purpose, you feel a connection, you're making an impact. But don't be too discouraged, because like I said, we're seeing employers stretch out these interview processes. They're taking a little bit of advantage, the same way job seekers took advantage in the Great Resignation, demanding more money, more flexibility. So the market, it's the same supply and demand we see with logistics or commodities versus moving them or making them. And it's just always going to be this balance.
Yep. And I also say this to anyone who's listening who has friends who are looking, make some introductions. It makes such a difference if you can make an introduction or two and somebody says, oh, It wasn't all lost today. I ended up talking to three or four people, and I did apply for some jobs, but I also learned some things from talking to people. Not, and if it's always like, I've introduced people to you, and I always say the same thing. Don't ask them to get you a job. That's not their job. They have customers. I said, it's your job to, they'll often give you great advice on what you need to do. Hey, you might tweak your resume this way, or you might consider this, lots of openings for this, but don't ask for a job, ask for advice.
Exactly, exactly, and that's like a career coach could probably help you to a job better, but I think this misperception, like as recruiting firms, our clients are hiring us to find them candidates, and we wanna help everyone, but we are limited to talking and engaging with candidates that they need.
Yes, exactly. If you're looking for a TMS, please consider my friends at Revenova. Revenova is a cloud based transportation management system built on the Salesforce platform, which means it has a built in CRM and a higher level of security, reliability, and performance. Revenova is used by many of the top 3PLs, brokers, carriers, and shippers because it has all the features. It's multimodal and it comes with lots of premium features like predictive pricing. If you want to learn more, please visit revenova.com. That's REVENOVA.com, or check the show notes for a link to my interview with Mike Horvath, one of the founders of Revenova. Right now, when you talk about logistics and supply chain, warehousing, fulfillment, what are the hot areas? What's still hiring?
I'm gonna say across all of that, it's more position specific and sales. And it's no surprise. Every company out there wants revenue generators, they want hunters. Even the companies that are on hiring freezes will say, but if you find a great BD rep or a great salesperson, we'll talk to them. The downside of that is there's a very short leash and there are some unrealistic expectations around production.
Yes.
So somebody on day 30, you cannot expect that person to already have brought in 2 million in revenue. It's not going to happen.
I worked for a company where the sales cycle, what we were selling, was at least 6 months or a year. It was a very long sales cycle. It was managed trans, and they wanted they wanted deals like in 60 days. And I was like, I told them when I got there that's not going to work. And then I left them, but I felt like it's a waste. Like, why bother? But to your point, they can get very unrealistic, and that's stupid, because also it's really, if you have a salesperson right now who's working and put the effort forth and you think they have the right talent, the idea that you're saying, oh, I got to push them out and get somebody else, stupid.
And there's so many factors that might prohibit them. And that's where soft skills really come into play. Do you need someone who has a book of business, or do you want someone who is reliable and they're strategic and they're good with time management and they're charismatic? That is the salesperson you're looking for.
So I want to talk about outsourcing. So we know business process outsourcing or nearshoring or supplementing your headcount with people from Colombia, Philippines, Mexico. We're seeing much more of that, but it isn't the complete solution, obviously. So talk about how that impacts the hiring market, and also this whole idea of, can I build a great team and have that great culture that you talked about in your TED Talk with outsourcing?
It's a great question. And I will preface with I think there are some amazing outsource providers out there specific to
Oh,
our
yeah.
industry. Joe, you could think back like they didn't exist 12 years
Oh,
ago.
yeah. Natalie, who's going to edit this podcast, she's from Lean Solutions Group. Highly recommend.
Yeah, exactly. And so this is definitely a newer concept and it works. There's no question. And what I want to say is I respect these companies. I have great relationships. I see a very clear need, but I do think employers need to understand the pros and cons to outsourcing. Are they less expensive employees? Absolutely. Do they speak English? Will they be in your time zone? With many of these models, yes. Will they be trained? Yeah, if you hire the right outsource provider, will they be part of your culture? That is a big one that I think is so situational because I'm going to guess Natalie is not your employee. You are contracting her out through Lean. And at the end of the day, you can't expect Natalie to be part of two cultures, especially if they're different. Which company is she really with? And she's with Lean. And I think that's you hope they will represent your company, they will stand up to your values, but from a true purpose, impact, long-term standpoint, they're not your employees. So why are you going to embrace your culture like a full-time employee would? I also think there's specific positions. I've seen some companies really succeed with an outsource model for cold calling, but then when your customer wants to meet you or they want to go golfing or go to dinner, are you going to fly that individual in from Colombia? Probably not. Many reasons. And so I think for the right role, it's appropriate, but it also comes down to using the right provider who understands your goals, your values. And then it really is also thinking about who's the liaison to this outsourced team? Is it you? And how are you managing and communicating with them? Or do you have a manager who's fully committed to overseeing your talent in Colombia? And those are the little things that companies miss. They go into it and it's almost too good to be true, but you still have to have the processes, the structure in place to make it work well.
Yes, yes. And we all know right now we don't see it because there's a slow market in hiring. But overall, we have reduced birth rate. So we are going to have fewer people available to work here. So we're going to use people from other countries. But this, and I want to get your two thoughts on this. A lot of times when we're getting lower cost, that's the thing that appeals to us first. But those operations are getting better and better, but they're still often very young. And I think we're starting to see you might have somebody who's senior and can help set a direction, but the execution might be with people who are, over in Colombia or Philippines. Please elaborate.
I think it's like anything else that we outsource in life, different subject, but since COVID, I outsource my grocery shopping. Like I realized during COVID how much I hate grocery shopping, and now I use Instacart. And I am willing to pay the premium to have my groceries at my door to make sure my family is fed and I am working. And I think that's with any outsourcing, like the model you just described. If these basic tasks, these repetitive tasks that maybe can't be automated, or maybe they are automated, but they still need a human eye or a human touch, those are the ones that you outsource. And so it's not always just the lowest paying positions. It's really what are the roles that we can sacrifice someone else doing for us because we can train them, because there's a clear process in place. But at the end of the day, the idea is so you can focus on what you're good at. So you are outsourcing because you could probably edit this podcast if you really wanted to, Joe, but you'd
No, I
be
can't.
doing it in the morning and you'd be watching YouTube videos. So you outsource it because you're valuable. And that's exactly how I think of it.
And I will say I spent much of my career in automotive where we outsourced a ton of stuff to Asia and to Mexico. And what we learned over time is that's where the expertise landed. So there's certain things that we don't do here anymore. And so that is going to happen a lot. We're going to find that there's going to be certain companies, and I wouldn't be surprised to mention Lean Solutions Group, but there's many others who are going to develop expertise that we're not going to even have here as much, which is fine. But I do think it's not a silver bullet to go, oh my God, yeah, just reduced all my labor costs because now they're all in another country. It's a supplementation. It's just another tool in the toolbox. We're still going to need to recruit really good people here. And we're going to have to learn to retain them. Two other things. So you said something when we were prepping that I liked, and you said that it was about the importance of culture and that the market will turn. And that when it does, you don't want to find yourself with a horrible culture because all you did was focus on, we have the advantage now.
We saw in like late 22 and throughout 23, a lot of companies eliminating their recruiting positions, their HR, their talent acquisition because hiring slowed down. And that's one philosophy. But my philosophy is you may only have one role right now, or you may not be hiring at all, but the market will flip. I'm not saying we will have something as extreme as the Great Resignation ever again, but don't think about it as just being able to attract new talent. Everything you are doing from a culture standpoint, an engagement, a development standpoint, first and foremost is for your current team. And that's how I think of it is let's take care of our current team and have the right programs in place. Let's treat them right. Let's have our values established. That is going to help our retention, and replacing people costs a lot of money. And I don't think a lot of companies consider, how bad it can be if you make a hiring mistake. But I think then you've got all these different things that contribute to your culture that you go out and leverage to attract new talent. And that's when it becomes a cycle. So I don't think any culture or HR teams right now, there may be a slowdown in hiring, but there is plenty to do to maintain their current workforce's happiness and to build up for hiring in the future, because you will need to one day. You can't recruit without retaining and vice versa.
Yes. And there's no sense going out and recruiting the very best if you're not going to train and retain them. What's the purpose of it? And I'm not just saying this to be nice, Charlie. From what I can tell, you've built a really good company with a really good culture. And so when people are looking for somebody to work with, they want to work with somebody who says, yeah, we believe in culture. You guys are fully remote. And since we are connected on LinkedIn, I see you guys all getting together on trips, not just business trips, fun trips, where you are saying, look, we no longer go to the office together, but we are getting together and I truly care about these people who I work with. And so you walk the walk, which is very nice.
Thank you. Thank you. No, that is what it's about. It's like we were actually just looking at this. Next year, we will have 4 employees hitting their 10-year anniversary at our firm, not to mention some 8 years and 9 years. And that I think says a lot, because I'm not trying to position myself as a retention expert, but I have seen it all from the industry and the market, but I've also lived it with my team. And it hasn't been easy to retain people for a decade, multiple people. One thing we do is we offer a 4-week sabbatical when you hit 10 years. Maybe that's why they're staying, but I guarantee that they're going to stay even when they come back, because there's the next milestone to go after. And there's this overall sense of feeling appreciated and respected. And so again, it's these little things. And I think that's what my message is all about is I'm not going to come in and recommend that implement this whole new technology that's going to change your culture. It's what are the little things you can do that we can all do to make a difference? And sometimes it's just saying thank you. And that is bottom up and top down. That is going to influence the culture.
Yeah, it's interesting. As I've aged, I've seen all of the different iterations of HR, or whatever you'll call it. So I remember there being like personnel, and then they changed to human resources, which, by the way, sounded very official back in the day. But then after a while, you're like, so I'm just seeing the resources the same as the computers or the equipment that we have in the office. It's overly sterile, and now very often I see companies that are saying, hey, this person's responsible for talent and culture. Many times when you say HR, you're like, HR just feels, and please nobody take offense because nobody wants to be in this bucket, but we're almost like we have a committee here that is looking not to hire people and looking for, here's all the rules you have to follow. And talent and culture speaks to, we are going to go get really good talent, and we're going to have a culture here that attracts talent and keeps the talent we have. So I think we're looking at this differently because we have to. Charlie, you're much younger than me. When I started working, nobody said, you'll love it here. The culture's great. Maybe it was. Usually it wasn't. Nobody cared. I never once went into an interview and said, tell me about the work-life balance. If I said work-life balance to someone, I would feel like I'm saying I'm a slacker and I like to go home early some days. Or if I said I want a good culture, they're like, oh, so you're a wuss. I get it. Okay.
That's what you're here for?
Now,
Yeah.
the next generation, my children's generation, they say that right away. I want to work at a company that has a great culture. So anybody who's got the gray hairs or the no hairs who's listening,
I guess
just they might be saying, oh yeah, I don't like that. It doesn't matter what you like. The generation that is in their 30s and now maybe even getting to their 40s, they expect more, and we raise them to expect more, and there are fewer of them. And as the economy grows, we need them. So if they want work-life balance, if they want a great culture, Got to deliver it.
Exactly. No, I sat on a panel maybe 8 years ago talking about millennials at the time, and there was a lot of talk about how entitled they were. Like, who do they think
Yes.
they are
Yes.
wearing slippers into the office or eating Cheetos on their couch during the day and thinking they could do their job? What they were asking for is what we truly all want. It's not that we want to wear ripped jeans. We want to be able to authentically express ourselves. And we spend half our lives working. I want to be myself half my life, all of my life.
Yes.
Same thing with the flexibility. I'm not saying you have to let me work from home and eat Cheetos on my couch. I'm just saying trust me and make sure that I'm trusted. Even if I have to come into the office and commute 2 hours, if I feel trusted, it's worth it. And so I think we have a lot to learn from that generation because their values are aligned with what we all want, but maybe like you said, Joe, like what we wouldn't have said because of a perception or a
Right.
judgment.
And by the way, as a baby boomer, when I came into the workforce, we were called soft and entitled. It is,
Every generation.
but every generation gets that. But you and your husband are raising your sons to want more and want a good life. You don't look and go, I hope they have a worse life than mine. You're like, I want them to be successful and happy and fulfilled. And so that's what we want for everybody. So and I joked while we were prepping, I said, my first few jobs, I worked for dudes who fought in wars like Korea and World War II. And the idea of going, hey, boss, I would like to go home early to watch my kids' baseball game. Be like, no, you just didn't do it.
Exactly. You didn't even ask.
Yep. So I want you to get your final thoughts on this. Oh, by the way, I will make sure I put a link to your LinkedIn profile, which everyone, if you're not following Charlie Saffro, you need to on LinkedIn. But I will also put a link to your LinkedIn profile, a link to your website, a link to your TEDx talk. If you give it to me, I'll put that in the show notes and any other links you give me. I'm going to summarize, and I want to get your final thoughts on what it takes to recruit and retain top performers in logistics. So we talked about very much an employer market. That whole thing with everybody saying, I'm going to work from home and I'm going to do this and I'm going to do that. Now we have employers saying, yep, we are in control of this. We will decide what you get. Doesn't mean they should take advantage, but lots of job seekers, not very many jobs. Outsourcing. We talked a little bit about that. It's a trend. It's going to be there. It's a supplementation to your team, but it is not going to replace your team. And we also talked about this idea that the market's going to turn. Work on your culture today, work on getting good talent and keeping the good talent. And if you have this idea that the market is going to be down for a long time and I can treat people as like I treat people poorly, that's not going to work. Final thoughts. What does it take right now to recruit and retain top performers, Charlie Saffro?
My easy answer, it's going to sound too simple, but treat employees like humans. If you are in any position, it's about having empathy. It's about putting yourself in someone else's shoes. An example might be that you may not be in a position to give every new hire 2 or 3 weeks of vacation, but maybe you're offering your standard 10 days, but we also offer birthdays off as a paid day or floating holidays. And it's those little things where I am seeing what's important to the human. It's not that extra week. It's knowing that when it's my family's holiday, that I'm not going to be questioned. I can take off and celebrate it. And so getting to know people behind their titles, asking little questions. You don't have to know every detail, but you should know a couple things about your employees. And that is going to build the relationship. It's going to instill connection. It is literally that simple, is just looking at these as human beings, not cogs in a machine, and making the effort to build a relationship like you would with any client.
Awesome. Awesome. So are you going to be a TMSA this year?
I will. Will you be there in New Orleans?
That is the plan.
All right. I posted something on LinkedIn yesterday about the last time I was in New Orleans. You can check it out. But I was walking down Bourbon Street and there were these men on hoverboards with 6-foot snakes just wrapped around their bodies. And that's my perception of New Orleans. So I can't say I'm super excited to go back, but I think I'm going to avoid Bourbon Street and it will be all good.
By the way, TMSA Elevate is in June 9th, 10th, and 11th in New Orleans. Last year it was in Savannah. I saw Charlie. It is an awesome event. If it's not too late, get over there. Anyway, what other conferences will we see you and the fine folks from CS Recruiting at?
Oh, let's see. So I will definitely be there. I'm actually doing a lot of conferences coming up that are in the HR, culture, talent realm. I'll be attending the Trimble conference in September.
Oh, I'll see you there. Yeah, I'll be there.
Yeah, I'm doing a
It's
panel,
in Vegas.
in Vegas, and then a couple undecided, just waiting to see what
It's
the schedule.
summertime. It's summertime. Enjoy the family a little bit.
Exactly.
Charlie, it's always a pleasure to talk to you. I love what you're doing. You're doing it right. And thank you so much for coming on the podcast.
Appreciate it. Thanks, Joe, for having me on. It was a great combo.
Yep. And thank all of you for listening to my podcast. Your support's very much appreciated. Until next time, onward and upward. You have been listening to the Logistics of Logistics podcast, where we engage with leaders in the logistics and supply chain community. If you like what you hear, please subscribe, hit the like button, and leave us a nice review on Apple or Spotify or wherever else you listen. Also, please check out our videos on YouTube and connect with us on LinkedIn. We're very big on LinkedIn. And you can also reach us on the logisticsoflogistics.com, our website.